and planted with timber at the end of the Second World War. A lot of my neighbors worked either in the quarries or in the forestry. I live here. The little stone cottage is where I'm inside there right now. And I bought this house at the end of 2019. It's a very tiny little house. And about 2 years later, the chapel went up for sale. When I moved into the house, I thought, oh, lovely, there's a chapel next door. At Christmas, they'll be singing, and won't that be nice? But then COVID happened, and the congregation is aging and shrinking, and they couldn't really take care of the chapel. So they put it up for sale, and it's pretty much in my back garden. So it would have been a real nightmare for me if it had turned into an Airbnb or something. So I bought the chapel, and I promised them that I would keep it, that I would not develop it, but that I would keep it as a chapel and keep it as a community building. And because I took the trouble to learn the language, and because I care about the community, and because I promised I would keep it the way it was, they sold it to me instead of to bidders, higher bidders. So it's a responsibility really that I've taken on to take care of this chapel. So the chapel's the first thing I'll tell you about, and then I'll say a little bit about the language and a little bit about what I've learned about the local history of this area. I don't know, again, how much you guys know about Welsh culture or the country of Wales, but chapels and the chapel movement have been really, really central to communities all over rural Wales and urban Wales in a way. There are lots of Welsh chapels in London, in fact, and in Birmingham and in Liverpool, where Welsh people have migrated into those. So Welsh chapels are a focus for Welsh-speaking community.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I'm the co-hosting and I don't know how to mute everyone. So can I ask everyone to mute themselves, please? Thank you.
Thanks. So this chapel still did have a very small and aging active congregation when I bought it. And I was able to go, they invited me to go to the last service when the chapel was deconsecrated. And that was really, really special and important for me because I got to see the building in its use. And I got to hear the singing in the chapel. Of course, singing is central. You would never, ever, ever get a kind of dissenting religion in Wales where there was no music allowed in a chapel. That is just not a thing. That is, that is just contrary to the whole spirit of Welshness. There will always be music wherever there are a bunch of Welsh people in a room. So there was beautiful, beautiful singing in the chapel service, and some people with some lovely voices. And it was just nice to be there. And of course, as a learner, it's interesting to hear the language and the preaching because chapel Welsh is kind of different than everyday Welsh. This is, again, if you speak Welsh, you know what that says. The date on there is 1819. The neighbors actually say that's wrong, and that was actually first built in 1816. Don't know. Capel yr Independent Chapel, Chapel of Independence. So it's a non-congregational, it's a non-denominational congregational chapel, right? And that's very important to the identity of the chapel. The first Capel yr in the valley was up the valley at a place called Drws. And then the congregation moved down here in 1816 and built this building. In the 1860s, 70s, it was renovated. And the congregation has been active then for 200 years, was active for 200 years on this particular site. A few of the things, I'm going to skip forward for a minute because I wanted to show you, I've saved a lot of papers and a lot of the old things that were just there in the chapel, including some very, very old Bibles. That one on the bottom was printed in 1848. The other ones are later in the 19th century. I think this one on the top right was donated in 1909 when the pulpit was built. And whether or not you know, there was a guy called William Morgan who translated the Bible into Welsh in the 17th century. But very near here is a Church of Wales Church called Eglwys Sant Tadechol in Mallwyd, where there lived a guy called John Davies, and he was the minister there for about 40 years, rebuilt the church, very amazing, special, very, very old church. It's a 6th century church, but John Davies rebuilt it and restored it in the 17th century. And he was a big part of Morgan's project to translate the Bible into Welsh. He translated all the Hebrew bits. And so he was so he's a very important person in the history of Wales, because of course what the Welsh Bible allowed was for people to come actually out of the Church of Wales and to establish these chapels and to keep their communities, and most importantly, their language. So the chapels were the focus throughout the 19th century for keeping the Welsh language alive. And in the 1970s, during what we call the Symudiad yr Iaith, the language movement, it was in the chapels often that people had meetings, organizing meetings and activist meetings. So it wasn't just services that happened in the chapel, all kinds of meetings and classes and studying and music events and social events. And in our vestry, we had Workers' Education Association classes, Rhys Davies, of course, the poetry contests, you know, and cyfarfodydd y prydydd yr ardal, like meetings of the rural poets in my area. You know, they used to happen in the vestry of the chapel. So it's a real cultural center of the whole community. I have here, yeah. So this was amongst the papers. This is quite big. It's sort of more than 11 by 14. It's a sort of big poster for a Cyman Vagani, a singing meeting, which happened in Capel Ebenezer, which is another Capel Annibenwyr in Dinas Mawddwy, a little bit up the road. And this is a common thing. We still have them around here. You know, some hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people get together to sing. So this is a poster for a Cyman Vagani that happened in the 1970s. This for me was the most special treasure that I found in the chapel after I bought it. I don't know if you can read it. It says Tachwedd Pymthegfed, 1874, the 15th of November, 1874. Llyfr Cyfrifon Ysgol Sabathol Sama, the account book for the Sunday school, for the Sabbath school in Capel Sama. And it's got the lists of all the members, what dues they paid, what they did. And then in the back, it has, it's lovely to see all these Welsh names popping up. And then as people come in, and then in the back of the book, it has all the notes from the Sunday school committee meetings. So all of the people who were active in the chapel and the Sunday school are kind of in the 1870s and early 1880s are all listed in this account book. So it's a quite wonderful and beautiful resource. And you can see it's all written in this gorgeous kind of copperplate script from the 19th century. So that's a bit about the chapel. What are we doing in the chapel now? Well, I'm working together with the people who are part of this new flax project to try and revive the flax industry and culture in the area, some craftspeople and some farmers. Some farmers are growing flax, some craftspeople are working with flax, making rope, making cloth, weaving, and they've got this great big giant loom that's 10 feet high, and they had nowhere to put it. And I said, well, you can put it in the chapel. And Cwmllynau, of course, is Flax Valley, so it kind of really fits this project. So they were really happy about it. So they're coming on Wednesday to put this big loom in the chapel, and a lady's going to be in the chapel weaving with flax throughout the winter. And we'll be gathering some tafodiaeth, local dialect, around weaving and cloth and crafting and growing and flax, you know, the culture and the history of flax in the valley, as people come to look at the work that Angela's doing on the loom. So that's the kind of thing I hope will go forward in the chapel. Music events, literary events, cultural events, and sort of arts and crafts revivals and everything in the Welsh language and kind of focused on the Welsh language. Ah, yeah, sorry, I forgot about this. From obviously the mid-1970s, the collection for people in Bangladesh, which was taken in the chapel, O Gymru Bangladesh, yn rhoi mai cariad, in bonds of love. And what I love about this is the list of people who donated. And these are neighbors, because this is a fairly recent document, I know these people. Particularly it says Teulu Kayasgen, which is a farm up there. And then it says £15. And then it says Mena Doi Bint. Well, that's my neighbor Mena Blake, who would have been about 10 years old at that time. And so she gave, she collected her own little money to give to this collection for Bangladesh. So I think that's really sweet. And it's nice to see these names. And it's difficult, I'm sure, for you to read that script. But what I wanted to point out is that people are not called by their second name. People are called by their place. People are called Trevor Talernai, not Trevor Jones. Jones is Trevor's last name, but he's called Trevor Talernai because Talernai is his farm. And I am called Meredith Chapel because I live in Chapel. And that is because place and location are the central and the crucial thing in Welsh culture. Where are you? Where are you located on the land? Where are you located in the world? Where are you located in relation to everyone else? Landscape and location are just this absolutely central thing. The first thing people want to know about you when they meet you is exactly where you're located and exactly who's located near you and how that all fits in and how that all works. And so people get called not by their name, not by their family name, but by their place. So I know a lot about the history of the Valley because I've learned most of it from talking to this guy. This is my neighbor, Cliff Lewis. He's David, but he's called Cliff. He's 92 now. And he was born right here in Cwmlynau, and the original Capel Sower. He went to the Methodist Chapel. And this is him. He was called up in 1951, and like so many young Welshmen, he was sent to the Suez in 1951, 1950, 1951. Many, many, many Welshmen were called up, drafted, and sent to Suez to be part of the military presence. I'm trying to say this in a neutral way, to be part of the military presence on the Suez Canal. And it was a horrific experience for Cliff. The British Army doesn't treat its squaddies well, and certainly treats its Welsh squaddies even worse. He was hungry. He was eating food that was contaminated with maggots. He was hot. He was being experimented on with all kinds of bizarre medicines and vaccinations. So it was a terrible experience for him, but he remembers it. It was certainly a life-changing experience. In this picture, he's holding up a copy of the Cymro, the national Welsh language newspaper. So that's Cliff in 1951. And Cliff tells me all kinds of stories about the history of the valley, the local area, how things were done. How did people thresh corn? How did people keep potatoes over the winter? How did people keep pigs? And what happened on the day you slaughtered a pig? What's the history of slate quarrying in the area? What kinds of machines were in the slate quarries? What kinds of processes were used? How things happened in the forestry? What was dug up when they dug up the land to plant the trees? All kinds of medieval artifacts and things people found underneath the soil. What happened in this valley in the Second World War? What Cliff saw as the planes went overhead to Liverpool, or as an American pilot crashed on a mountain near here called Arunvalswy, and all these kinds of stories about the history of the area and things that what happened in the evening when everybody quit work and they'd come down on the common and play games, you know, just everything about local life. And it's completely wonderful. Oh, and some, you know, some sort of chwedle that are a little bit you know, some tall stories too, and kind of local myths and, you know, stories of the area and stories of tragedies and, yeah, things like that that happened. And Cliff shares a lot, whoops, I don't know what happened there. Cliff very generously has shared a lot of things with me. These are some walking sticks Cliff made. He carves them out of wood. He's got about 50 of them at home. These are all made out of hazel. He's got some made out of blackthorn and oak. And he taught me all about the process by which he finds the right wood and carves these and makes them and treats them. So those are pretty wonderful. And you can see some of them are all animals and birds and things. These are the tools Cliff used for poaching during the war. And Cliff says without poaching, they would have starved here during the war. They poached rabbits and they poached salmon out of the river. Cliff's granddad made this, I want to say trident because it's called trivver in Welsh, harpoon. And then Cliff's granddad lived in Aberangel, which is about a mile away, and he had a nevile, smithy. Cliff and I speak Welsh, so I'm translating. He had a smithy, and he taught Cliff how to work metal in the smithy. So Cliff made this hook, which you would use if the salmon were in the rapids, you used the hook. If they were hiding in the pools, you used the trivvar. Well, the whole time, the kipper, the water bailiff, was after you, right? So Cliff's a young boy of 10, and he's sneaking out before dawn with his friends to poach salmon in the river. And the kipper is out looking for them. So they have to be able to run really quickly, which is why the trivver doesn't have a handle, because you had to hide it in your clothes. And then when you needed a handle, you cut one off a bush and you fit it in quite quickly. And then, you know, you could spear a salmon. Now, Cliff tells me, I simply repeat to you what I've been told, that because of that, the handles were not always secure. He once speared a salmon, and the salmon got away, the handle came out, and the salmon got away down the river with this harpoon sticking out of it. And then in the afternoon, he was walking down by Cemais, and he saw Biddig's dad, Eirig, by the river, said, look at this salmon I caught. I caught this giant salmon, and it had this harpoon sticking out of it. So according to Cliff, this harpoon traveled all the way from here down to Cemais in the back of a salmon, and then he got it back from Eirig Humphreys. I just leave that with you. Another thing, and I thought this would be a nice way into talking about the language a little bit. Another thing that Cliff has shared with me is the whole history of a poet who lived here called Dovoy, Richard Jones. That says the local poets series, I suppose I would translate that, number 14, Dovoy, Richard Jones. So of course, if you're a poet, you have your name, but then you have your bardic name, you know, under which you submit poetry. Dovoy, according to Dovoy, was an old name for the Dovey Valley. And Dovoy lived up the valley at a farm called Cymaidrol. He was a farmer. And he was, it says here, sorry, Prydydd the Rwlad. So Prydydd is another word for poets. I mean, these words change meaning, but Prydydd, sorry, that's wrong. Let me just take that out. This is kind of lesser than getting the title of Barth, to have the title of Prydydd. And like Prydydd the Rwlad, like rural poet, right? And there are poets all over rural Wales. Still, we have poetry classes that happen in the pub up the road in Dennis Malsey. Poetry classes meet in village halls, they meet in pubs, they meet in libraries all over the country, and they're sort of informal. It's poetry is not necessarily a sort of high culture thing that only wealthy people with education do. Poetry is something everyone does. Dovoy only went to school until he was about 9 or 10 years old. But he could do things with language that are quite remarkable, because the rules of Welsh poetry are incredibly complex, and it's incredibly difficult to achieve verse inside the constraints of Cynganedd or the Englynion, the Englyn, or those kinds of poetic forms. So you have to have a very special kind of mind and a very special kind of relationship to language to be able to achieve verse in these poetic forms. So it's a very special talent. But Dovoy also had a community function. So when my neighbor Menna Blake and her twin sister Maynir were born, Dovoy wrote an Englyn for them on the occasion of their birth. If someone got married, Dovoy would write an Englyn on the occasion of their marriage. If someone died, he would write an Englyn on the occasion of their passing. And that was the sort of social function, is the sort of social function of local poets. And so he won a couple of chairs in Eisteddfodydd at the county level, and those chairs were in his house in Cymaidrol. It's really sadly since gone to ruin, but most of Dovoy's papers and things went to the Llyfrgell Cenedlaethol in Aberystwyth, so they are kept in the archive there. And by way of that, I wanted to recommend something to you. If you have, I don't know how many of you might have seen this book, but if you have an interest in Welsh language poetry, absolutely read this book. Meredith Hopwood is currently our archdderwydd, so she's the person who gives out all the prizes and leads all the ceremonies in the National Eisteddfod, because she is a chaired poet herself. So she's won a lot of accolades as a poet. She wrote this book called Singing in Chains. It's called that because one of the words for Cynganedd, this form of poetry that the book is about, in Welsh is canu cais, bound singing. Because there are such constraints on the poetic form that it's like doing something in chains. It's like doing something when you're bound. But if you can achieve it, it sings. You can make the language sing. So Meredith wrote this book in English, but the examples are in Welsh, and it comes with a CD, so you can hear her reading the examples in Welsh, but she explains the whole history and rules of the form to you in English. And she wrote it in English in hopes that English speakers who live in Wales would be able to have some access to what is so important and beautiful about the language, and why the language is so closely embedded in poetry, and the poetry is so closely embedded in the language, and what an international treasure those two things are, and why they're unique on earth, and why they're so important. So I've struggled. I've done workshops in Cynganedd. I've listened to Cynganedd. I've read it. I've even tried writing it. I never understood it until I read Meredith Hopwood's book. And suddenly I was like, I'm never going to be able to do this. But maybe I will one day, I don't know. But at least it makes sense. I understand what it is. And you notice that the subtitle is not writing Welsh verse, it's listening to Welsh verse. Cynganedd depends on its listeners. It happens publicly. It happens in groups. It happens in front of audiences. And listening to Cynganedd is as much a talent as being able to write Cynganedd. And Cliff says to me, if there's even one little syllable off in Cynghanedd, you'll be able to hear it. It's like a bad note in music. So listening to Cynghanedd is a talent in itself. So she's trying to teach people to listen to it and to appreciate it. It's really worth it if you can get a hold of that book. So that is Cliff and the history of the valley and a bit about the house and the chapel. So from the poetry into the language. So Susan asked me to say a little bit about learning the language and my experience as a learner. I worked in Wales in 2002, 3, 4, and then I went back to England to work for quite some time. I came back to work in Wales in 2018, and I knew if I was coming to live here permanently, I absolutely would learn the language. But I waited a year because I wanted to be serious, and I didn't want to pick everything up at once, buying a new house, moving to a new job, learning a new language, and then fail and then drop it. And I knew I wanted to really give myself to it. So I waited until I was settled. I waited a year. So I started learning Welsh at the end of 2019. I can now speak Welsh fluently because I worked incredibly hard at it, but also because I have really wonderful neighbors who very patiently helped me and practiced and spoke to me, even when it was a pain in the neck to speak to me because my Welsh was terrible. They still listened to me and spoke to me and encouraged me. So I'm really, really lucky lucky in two ways. The Welsh government supports the learning of the language. You can take classes absolutely for free. Their materials are online for free. You can get all kinds of support as a Welsh language learner. Financial support, social support, learning support, everything. But also, I live in a Welsh-speaking community, and that's been, I'm so fortunate to live in a Welsh-speaking community as I learn the language. And I would say, without any exaggeration, that apart from raising my daughter, it is the most rewarding thing I've ever done. So people say to me, oh, is it worth it? Is it worth the work? Mae'n talu nôl 10 gwaith. It pays you back 10 times the effort that you've put in. It's such a joy. It's such a beautiful language. It's such a joy to be able to speak the language. It's a joy to be able to communicate with people in their own first language. The reason that Cliff will sit with me for hours every Sunday and tell me his history and his stories is because he can tell them to me in Welsh, because I care enough to learn the language. It means the world to people. And if you have enough respect and you care enough to learn the language, people will do anything for you. And you suddenly become part of a community. I said to someone once, we were talking about we have a second housing crisis in Wales, kind of like if you lived in somewhere like Cape Cod, second homes are sort of destroying everything, destroying whole communities. And I was talking about it once, and somebody interviewed me on the news, and I said something about second homes on the news, and people came up to me and said, I'm so glad is the Welsh language news, speaking in Welsh. And people would come up to me and say, oh, I'm so glad you said that. And I said to someone, no, it shouldn't have been me. It should have been someone else speaking. I'm an incomer too. I don't have any right to talk about this. And my friend Sean looked at me and she said in Welsh, you're not an incomer. You speak the language. You're one of us. That's how much it means to people that you've made the effort, that you care enough. It's like, that's it. You're one of us now because you've spent the time and you've made the effort to learn the language. So it kind of really means everything to people. And of Celtic languages and of endangered languages generally on Earth, the Welsh language is the big success story, right? It's under 1 million people on Earth who speak Welsh, but that still puts us in the top 7% of languages on Earth. 93% of the languages that exist on Earth have less than 1 million speakers, or less than 800, 900,000 speakers. So Welsh has sustained itself. and sustained a Welsh-speaking population big enough to be able to survive and keep changing the way languages do and keep alive and keep adapting. And it's used in everyday conversation everywhere in Wales. At all the schools around here are taught in the Welsh medium. The kids on the bus are speaking Welsh to each other as they go back and forth on the public bus to school, because I hear them every day. I speak Welsh to all my neighbors. We have concerts and talks and meetings all the time in Welsh. So it's very much alive. Endangered, but alive. I don't know what else to say about the language, but people might have questions. I write, the other thing that really helped me as a learner, if anybody here is learning, I am a writer, so I wrote a diary every day in Welsh from the time I started. So in the beginning, it was just like, mae hi'n braf heddiw, you know, or whatever. And as I got better and better at Welsh, I could write all of my thoughts. I could plan my novels. I could do other kinds of writing. You know, I could talk about complicated things and philosophical questions and feelings and whatever. And every time I needed a word, I had the Geiriadur Mawr next to me, the big dictionary. And every time I needed a word, I'd look it up. So keeping a diary helped make the language my own. It helped make me fluent, but it also helped me grow my vocabulary, because I'd need words to express myself and I'd look them up, and then because they were mine and they were in my own sentences, I'd remember them. And then I'd hear them in conversation and they would solidify in my mind. I will say, Susan asked me to say a little bit about my work. I'll say a little bit about it just quickly before we do questions. These are my most recent 2 novels, and I've published 4 novels. These are numbers 3 and 4. And I picked these 2 because I actually published them with Honno Press, which is a small Welsh women's press, which was founded in the 1980s. It's headquartered near here in Aberystwyth. And Honno, if you know, means that woman over there. Pwy yw honno? You know, who's that woman over there? So that's why it's called Honno. It's because it's like that woman over there. Anyway, Fall River is set in the United Kingdom. It's set in Saltash on the border of Cornwall. It deals with in the dockyards in Britain, as in the dockyards in America, there was a huge crisis with workers being exposed to asbestos. Just like in Virginia, same thing happened in the Plymouth dockyards. Lots and lots of men died. Some of their wives died because they would bring their clothing home covered in asbestos dust, and the wives would be exposed. So the book is partly about that. It's also partly about the scandal of, I don't know if you know, but in England, not in Wales, but in England, the whole state school system was privatized over the last 10 to 15 years. And turned into a money-making business. So there's sort of no such thing as what Americans would call a public school or a state school in England anymore. They're all run for profit by companies. And this led to, big surprise, tremendous corruption. So Fall River is about the corruption in the academy scandal, the privatization of schools, and it's about asbestos poisoning, and it's about a local community. And the relationship between local regional communities and London in the area of Brexit. It's sort of a Brexit novel, really. Wales has resisted privatization of schooling. So that's a list of things that are better in Wales than in England. Our schools are properly funded, state-funded schools. Our prescriptions are free. If you live in England, you have to pay $8.99 for prescription drugs. Even if it's something that would cost you £2,000 in America, you still only have to pay $8.99. But still, there's a token fee for prescriptions. We don't have that in Wales. Prescriptions are free. I got my free bus pass at the age of 60. In England, you have to wait till you're 67. So the Welsh government does a lot of things socially better than the English government. And the Welsh government is able to do that because of devolution, because we are a country with our own independent government, semi-independent government. We still depend on England for our funding. We depend on San Stefan for our funding, but we're allowed to spend it how we want. And we spend it on things like healthcare and schools, which is makes Wales a better place to live, and a more comfortable and a happier place to live. Right, so that's Fall River. Cold Grace is set in northern New England, and when I was researching, Cold Grace was before I lived in Wales permanently, but I did read about the connections between Wales and New England, and the quarries, and the fact that Welsh people moved to New England to work in the quarries, and that people farmed sheep at one time in places like Vermont, which seems amazing, but people did. So this book is set in 1913, and it incorporates some of those connections between Wales and New England. It's a sort of revenge tragedy. It's a sort of rural tragedy, and it's very much got like a naws Cymraeg. It's like a very Welsh novel in ways. It has a lot in common with rural Welsh novels in the sense that it's very sort of grim novel about an isolated rural community in which a tragedy happens, and it's very, 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 very steeped in landscape, in a very felt and visual sense of landscape in the way that most Welsh novels are also. And I could recommend, if you're starting to read Welsh, I could recommend some good novels at different levels to read if you're interested. I think that's me, and I will let you go ahead and ask questions if you have any. I'm looking at the Joneses and the Roberts.
I have a question.
Hi.
Luann, hold on, let me get my
Hi,
video
Luann.
on.
I have a cousin named Luann.
Oh, does she spell it my way?
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing. I've met very few people that spell it my way. Hold on, I'm trying to get my video to start so I show up. Ooh, I did something wrong. There I am.
Hello, Luann, there you are.
I have a question about slide 6 when you found the account book.
Yes.
For the church. What were they actually accounting? What did you buy a pew like you did in some Episcopal churches? Did you have a portion that you were expected to keep the minister paid, or pastor? I'm Episcopal, so reverend is for me. But
reverend, yeah.
Yeah. And did they have, I don't think the Welsh had tithes specifically, or because they were that nonconformists, maybe they just didn't pay them. But could you mention what kinds of things you saw in the account book? And did they also feed children? Maybe was the church also maybe related to educating the really young ones instead of a school?
Yeah, okay, those are
Thank
such good questions. So no tithing because the chapel's independent. So you have the Church of Wales, right? And the chapel movement starts first in the 18th century, and then there's I don't know when it starts, I think early 18th century. And then there's a big chapel revival in the 19th century. And you had what was called, and I know this because my neighbors who were members of the chapel tell me these things and I ask them. You had what was called a cerdyn ailadaeth, a membership card, and you paid every year. You paid for your membership cards, and the trysorydd, the treasurer, kept the membership cards. People also seem to have paid a fee for the Sunday school itself, and that's in the book. And everyone went to Sunday school, adults and children. So in different areas of I should have took a picture of the inside of the chapel, sorry. In different areas of the chapel, the adult men were over here and the adult women were over there, and then the children were over here or whatever. And everyone went to Sunday school and everyone studied. Welsh people are very studious. There's a lot of value placed on education here.
Oh, yes.
So yes, the children were taught, and they had to do things like write essays. You know, because my neighbors remember doing that in the Sunday school. And another great memory, everyone likes to tell the story about how sometimes when no one was looking, the kids would climb up to the clock. Welsh chapels have clocks, which I always think is really weird. Having a clock in a church, I was raised Catholic. Seems weird to me having a clock in a church, but all Welsh chapels always have clocks. And they would sneak up and move the hands, you know, so they could get done more quickly. And then one time some kid broke the breich, they call them, arms, breichai on a clock. A kid broke one, you know, and it fell down. And of course, then they got busted moving the hands of the clock. Yeah, so they learned stuff. So around here, the schools were also in Welsh. The primary school was also in Welsh. So you went to school in Welsh anyway until you were 11. Back in the day. Now you go to school in Welsh until you're 18 here. But it used to be you went to school in Welsh until you were 11. And then you went down to Machynlleth and you went to the secondary school, which was English language. So a lot of my neighbors had to experience this really quite traumatic thing of coming out of their language world, being any Iaith Cymraeg, they didn't speak any English, and suddenly had to go to school in English. And with people they didn't know. I mean, they went with their friends, right? But you're in this bigger context and everything's in English and, you know, it's all really difficult. But in those areas of Wales where there was the Welsh Not and people were punished for speaking the language in school and all that stuff, it was in the chapels where people were taught to speak and read and write in Welsh. So in that sense, kids were really taught in the chapels, but they also learned discussion and sort of exposition and those kinds of things in the kind of essays and stuff that people wrote in Sunday school. And the other thing to say about membership cards is that if you did something wrong, really wrong, you know, they might tynnu'r cerdyn, pull your card. So you could have your membership card pulled.
Well, a lot of my family were Quakers and they actually got disowned and it was in the records. So having your
Wow,
membership card
disowned.
pulled is not fun, but being disowned is like, I
That's
guess I forget
the
what the
language
Amish
is
word
quite
is when
harsh.
they
Yeah,
shun somebody.
yeah. Mostly it's
Mhm.
about disgwyl cyn priodi, expecting a baby without being married.
Oh, did they pay for pastor housing or was that just provided near the church?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a thing, a house up here called the Manse, or sometimes people call
Right.
it the Tea Capel. And the minister lived in that house. At
Right.
some point that was sold off. And then there were fewer and fewer ministers or preachers. Sometimes you had, I can't, they're called like bregathwr dymunol, like lay preachers. I don't know why they call them dymunol, but like lay preachers who traveled around and preached. You know, they'd probably get a collection. There'd probably be a collection. But nowadays you've got one pastor or preacher, minister, for lots and lots of chapels. You know, so that person will travel around because there are fewer and fewer people doing it. Really. Yeah.
Thank you. My dad is my Welsh side, a little bit of Cornwall thrown in there, but mostly Welsh. And he was raised Methodist, but my mother was Episcopal, and we lived closer to my grandmother's Episcopal church. So that's how my brother and I were raised. But we always had a smattering of knowledge about the Methodist church. But I do remember a friend of mine who was Methodist. I took her to my church one time when she was visiting. She said, "I can't believe you guys jump." I said, "What do you mean jump?" She said, "You jump up, you get down to kneel, you jump up for something, you sit, you get down to kneel." And she, in her church, said they just sat through the entire service. There wouldn't be kneelers that you would kneel on for prayers or, you know, necessarily rising for certain prayers.
Yeah,
which I
we've got
thought-
kneelers there are kneelers in the chapel, but when I went to service, there was no kneeling. There was standing up and sitting down, but there was no kneeling. But there are kneelers in the chapel, so they must have done it
Oh,
at
that's
some point.
interesting.
But I think the congregation's very elderly, so that's probably why at some
The
point they
bad
stopped
knees, yeah.
getting people to kneel, because yeah,
Well, thank you for the answers.
yeah.
Veronica,
Meredith, yes, thank you, Meredith.
Hi.
I got lovely to hear you this afternoon, and I got my Welsh. Well, I got my AA book out of
Yeah.
Routes to Find You, and I realized that you're not too far from Aberystwyth, and I know Aberystwyth quite well, but I grew up in Cardiff. But it's been fun looking at the little villages that you've been talking about. So that
Oh,
was,
good. So it's nice you can see them. Yeah.
yes, in my map. So the other thing is I'm halfway through Cold Grace, and I was really interested in you talking about the landscape, because as I'm reading it, I have to keep reminding myself that it's northern New England.
Yeah. 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 It's thank you very much for reading. Yeah, I think it's got this very Welsh sort of atmosphere, that book. It feels like one of those rural Welsh novels.
It certainly does.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's beautifully written. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you very much.
And
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to mention to Luann, who is an Episcopalian, that I grew up, and we used to call it the Anglican Church in Wales. So it was the Church of England in Wales. And I imagine it still is.
Yes.
And actually, they have a new archbishop, and she's a woman. So
Yes.
we're
Well,
all very excited about that.
It
all
is
age-
that, isn't it? Yeah, it's the Church of England in Wales, but it calls itself the Church of Wales now, doesn't it? But it is,
sometimes
yes.
I was telling someone the other day by email, sometimes when I'm arguing with someone and they'll say, well, that's kind of a liberal point of view. And I'll say, come on, I'm descended from Henry VIII. So my mother's side is all English and stuff. And it's like, of course, I mean, he invented divorce. So that's kind of liberal. But my, with all the things with my dad's side, my dad and my mother were very different kind of personalities. And my favorite course in college was 2 semesters of the history of America, which of course takes you back to every other country where things came from. And my dad on his Welsh side, always, we called him more neighborly. Daddy did for his neighbor before he did for himself. And my mother, we would laugh because she was sort of the Episcopal snob, like, well, why are you helping them when we're here at home and want something done? And, you know, and Dad was a member of the volunteer fire company because that helped the community. So I always saw that difference. And I always thought it was my dad's Welsh roots because they were from maybe a society that had it a little rougher at times. They were coal miners and they'd have to stick together through family or through neighborliness.
Yeah.
And then my mom has a lot of Quakers that got disowned because they ended up marrying out of the faith.
While I can see everyone's hands, is there anybody here learning the language? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, if you ever have any questions, you can always ask me.
Meredith, I just wanted to ask you about your cottage.
Yeah.
So it was attached to the chapel, and what was the use of the cottage at that time?
Well, this is all a mystery to me, because there's a row of cottages, and there's certainly some of the older buildings in the village. Yeah, they're old. Now, there was someone, so originally the row was as long as the chapel. So the original building, which is where the chapel is, was only as high as the cottage. And you can see the original wall in the east wall of the chapel. And then I don't know whether they raised the roof when it got extended in the 1860s, 70s. It's a real mystery. Whether there were 5 cottages and then they made the chapel out of the 2 end cottages, or whether there was always a chapel and some cottages. I can't find any reference to these houses being called anything else but Tai Capel. So maybe there was always a chapel here. My neighbor who sold me this little cottage told me that the property dated back to 1602. This house, I don't believe her. I don't believe that this house is that old. There's some evidence that maybe it could be a 17th century building. The beams are oak, which usually kind of stopped after 1700. There are crooks. There were, when we took up the sets forward in the chapel to replace all the rotten woodwork, there were crook beams under there. Crook beams are early modern, you know, so, but they got reused a lot as, you know, beams for other stuff, so it's hard to tell. So there are a couple things that you can do, and if anybody's researching Welsh history, you can look on the Mapiadegum, the tithe maps. So the census is, I have looked at the census for this house, but they only go back to the around 1900. Before, there are a couple of censuses before 1900, but they only say lower Cwmlynau, mid Cwmlynau, upper Cwmlynau. They don't talk about individual addresses. So they list all the people in lower Cwmlynau, all the people in mid Cwmlynau. Like, what even is that, you know? But as censuses that mention this house only go back to about 1900. So you could look. Older than the censuses were the tithe maps. So there was a big tithe mapping happened in 1841 or something, and maybe older than that. And then there are other county records, like if estates are sold, quite often all of the properties on the big estate, all the little cottages on the big estate, you know, will be listed and they'll be located. There might be even be a map. Sometimes there is a map. So those are ways you can kind of go back a little further. To try to find references. I looked in Wild Wales. He walks right past here, but he doesn't, you know, he doesn't mention Cwmlynau. He mentions Cemais and he mentions Dynasmalthy, and we're right in the middle of that, but he doesn't mention us. So you know, it's hard to know what the cottages were for. In living memory and in census memory, they were people who worked in the quarries. People who worked as carters. I don't know if you know about Desib Heddw Chubid in 1923. Women all over Wales signed a peace petition and sent it to Washington. And it was recently given back to Llyfrgell Cenedlaethol, so it's now back in Aberystwyth. And when it came home from the Library of Congress back to Aberystwyth, and it is now in our National Library. And when it came back, they did a big exhibition and they crowdsourced all the work of digitizing the names. There are 400,000 women signed it. And 2 of my neighbors went down and saw the exhibition, and they took pictures of all the signatures from Cwmlynau, and all 3 women in these houses signed the peace petition. And I'm sure it went through the chapels. I'm sure the reason is it went through the chapels. I would imagine the chapel members came around and asked women to sign the women's peace petition.
Right.
Because it's not a heavily unionized area. In the South Valleys, it would have been the unions. You know, who did it.
Meredith,
But
Susan Sitt was very, very, very involved with that project. So if you have some neighbors that actually went and looked at the exhibit, she might like to know that if you haven't told her yet, because she was instrumental in trying to transcribe, trying to get what was going on in America at the time. And
yeah,
we linked her up with the granddaughter of one of the 4 women that were on the piece.
yeah, we can, and
Interchange.
also the stuff is still in the National Library, so I can go down and look at it for her anytime. Yeah, but yeah,
Meredith?
there are, so I know the names of the 3 women who lived in these 3 houses in 1923. And
Nice.
also Cliff has told me all about, apparently the guy who lived in my house was not a very nice guy. And he did a lot of really weird stuff to people. So, but I know a lot about the people who lived here in the 40s, 50s from Cliff. And then I know who lived here in 1923 from the Desa Heddelgebied. And I know from the censuses, you know, back to around 1921. And one of the interesting things about the census is that what you see is that they started registering language, I think, in 1901. I'm not sure. It might have been 1891 or 1901. They start listing language, and all the children speak only Welsh. They're unilingual Welsh. And all the adults, most of the adults, not all the adults, most of the adults also speak English because they've had to learn it to go out to the world of work. So it's like that 1911, 1921, 1931. And around 1931, you see the first adult in the village who speaks English and not Welsh. Somebody has married an Englishman and he's moved in. And now this community is less than 50% Welsh speaking, I'd say, or maybe 50-50. And that has happened. In the 1950s, there were still people around here who didn't speak English at all. People who lived on the farms, you know, couldn't speak English at all if they lived remotely. They wrote that people were very literate. Welsh is a very literate language. People read, people wrote, people published. People did schooling, people did literary and you know, all kinds of literary endeavors in the Welsh language, but didn't speak English. But now you can't, there's no one in Wales who isn't bilingual. So on the censuses, you can watch the language being drowned in a way. And it's quite stark. 100 years ago, no one in this valley spoke English at all. You know, or no child in this valley spoke English. And you can just start to see it, you know, through the censuses. Yeah. And you know, people are trying to reverse that trend. Schools are now changing from English medium schools to Welsh medium schools, you know, and the government is trying to change that trend. And sort of, it's more like keeping back a tide, really. There's a lovely collection of poems by one of our young poets called Iestyn Tyne, and it's called Dysgu Nofio, learning to swim. And he means by that climate change and the rising seas. And we've got villages on the coast that are going to be swallowed by the sea shortly. But he also means learning to swim as your language is drowning. You know, as you're drowning in another colonial language, you know. So he means it in both those ways.
Meredith, Susan couldn't stay with us, as you know, for the entire talk. But just so you know, she's going to be in Wales at the
Opening.
there's going to be a talk, and it'll be on Zoom in case you can't go to the library. And I'm looking at my phone.
Oh, it's in the library.
Yes.
I believe it's going to be at the library, and she's going to be doing a talk. And there's going to be, I think, an opening of another exhibit room or the validation of a permanent exhibit of for peace in the library.
Oh, brilliant! Oh, I will
so
definitely go.
Yeah, if you can touch base with Susan, she'll be around.
I'll email her and ask. Yeah.
Okay, because she'll be
Thank
here.
you.
She's leaving the United States on Tuesday.
Oh my goodness! It's happening very soon.
It's happening, I believe, next week.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll email her. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Meredith?
Yeah.
I'm from Florida. I'm visiting my daughter in Connecticut now, but my mom was Welsh. She came from North Wales as a war bride. And
Wow.
I'm learning Welsh.
Hi, Auntie.
Diolch. I just went with my husband. I used to go every year with my mom for 3 months at a pop to stay with my nine and tide. But I'm just learning Welsh now recently. And we went to Wales this past summer. And, I have family in Llandudno and Penrhyn Bay. Um, it was very
Lovely
difficult.
part of the world.
Yes, it was very difficult to get anyone to speak Welsh. And the only place I could get people to speak Welsh was when I went up in the mountains. But if
Yeah.
I didn't know, I would go into a shop and start speaking. I went to Harlech. I mean, a little shop there. And I started speaking in Welsh. And she didn't understand a word I was saying. It was very,
Yeah, sometimes people, if you're a learner, sometimes people just will speak back to you in English.
no, they didn't speak it. They didn't.
Yeah, possibly.
It was
Yeah.
sad. She said she lived
Next
there.
time, go to Carnarvon.
Carnarvon, yeah, I have been there. I didn't get to speak there because we just stopped through. Yeah, but I want to tell you that. And what you were saying about people not using the last name because, they're all Jones and Williams and Evans. I remember my mother had a friend, Betty de Norwig, because she lived in that area. Then I had another neighbor, Mrs. Jones Bringwalia, because that
Yeah.
was the name of her house. So it brought back memories. And I'm definitely going to get Cold Grace because we have a second home in Vermont.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and there was a lot of, I believe, slate quarrying there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we went to Granville, New York, which is close to Pulteney, and Granville, New York, which was very heavy with the slate mining or quarrying.
And there are, of course, there are Welsh chapels in those areas too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Have you been to those areas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My parents are from upstate New York. Yeah.
Oh, okay, very good.
Yeah.
Just some
Yeah.
thoughts I wanted to share with you, but I'm definitely going to get Cold Grace because I know that will be.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the other places where I've been where, I mean, if you came to this area, there'd be lots of people who'd speak Welsh to you, but I went on holiday in Penllyn. I went and stayed in Aberdaron. I took the train up to Pwllheli.
Pwllheli, my mom came from there.
Yeah, well, 80% of the people in Pwllheli speak Welsh.
Yes.
So, and I went to Aberdaron, and I didn't have to speak a word of English the whole time.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's if you want to practice, but you got to persist with people because Welsh is so oral that people the vowels are we don't have all the phonemes that Welsh has, so often we're mispronouncing things and people literally don't understand what we're saying.
There you go.
Just because we're actually saying a different word
Yeah.
because the phonemes and the vowels are so subtle, so it takes a long time to get the pronunciation right. So you kind of have to persist with people.
Yeah. There are a lot of similarities. We went to Nant Gwytherin, I think it's pronounced.
Nant Gwytherin, yeah.
Yeah. And that's an all Welsh speaking area where you can learn speaking.
Yeah. They do residential courses there. If
Yes.
anybody wants to go, they do really great residential courses there. And
It's
you'll
fun,
just get to speak the language all week, which is
Yeah.
great.
It was great.
Yeah. And there's another thing, like I can go to those for free. I mean, if you live in Wales, there's so much support for language learners,
Mhm.
which is really great. But you just have to, I found as a learner, I had to pursue every opportunity. And you have to really chase the opportunities to use the language because people, it's just, people will just speak English to you because it's easier.
Mhm.
So you really have, I mean, people do that to me in Italy. When I try to speak Italian in Italy, they just answer me in English. It's so much easier. It's just, because my Italian is crap, right? So, do you know what I mean? So you have to kind of pursue it. And now I would say I can go whole days and I don't have to use English. And I'd say about 50% of my life I live in Welsh, at least 50%. If not more. So you can, but you have to go after the opportunities really. But it's great. I mean, it's great that it doesn't even matter how much you learn, is it? It's great that you're learning,
Yeah. Well, I love it. Yeah.
And you get to go on holiday in Llandudno, which is really nice.
Oh, I've been going since I was 2.
Yeah, it's such a nice
home
place
away
though.
from home. Yeah, it is a lovely place.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sarah, can I just say that we have a member, I don't think she's here today, in our Welsh Society. Her name is Pamela Petro, and she's a very, very interesting woman. And I'll just say she's written a book called Travels in an Old Tongue. And it was her experience of trying to get people to answer her and
And Cymraeg.
Welsh. Yeah. And it's fascinating because she goes, and she's a travel writer. So she goes all around the world to where there are Welsh speaking people. And she ends up finding that in Patagonia, because
Oh, yes.
they didn't speak English, they had to respond to her in Welsh. It's a very entertaining book. I would highly recommend that one.
Oh, wow. Travels in an Old Tongue, it's called.
Yeah, she was a student. I don't want to go into it too much because it's just so lovely. And she's a wonderful writer. She was a graduate student in Mid Wales, and had kind of like a love affair with Welsh and the Welsh language. So she was so adamant that she wanted to speak Welsh. And it's the struggle that she had to find a place where she could get people to actually, it's kind of a thing of love for people to do that. You are very lucky, Meredith, that they're lovingly supporting
I'm
you.
really, really lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Really, really lucky. I'm so aware of that. I'm incredibly fortunate, as not just as a learner, but to have a community like I have, it's just in any language, to have a community like ours is really special anyway. But yeah, I am really lucky as a learner as well. Yeah. People come here because it's beautiful and they love the landscape, but a lot of people don't bother to learn the language.
Meredith, do you have family and are immediate family, and are they learning it too? Because are they living there with you?
No. My daughter lives in London, and doesn't speak Welsh. She understands a little bit of Welsh, but she doesn't speak Welsh. Yeah, and the rest of my family are in America.
Mhm.
So,
Meredith,
no, I don't.
Meredith, you mentioned your parents were from upstate New York. Where in upstate New York?
Mom was born in a little village called Jordan outside Syracuse.
Okay.
And Dad was born in a little village called Worcester near Cooperstown.
Yep, I know those places.
Yeah. So they're both kind of from rural areas of upstate New York. So when I was writing Cold Grace, I asked them lots of questions about farms in the early 20th century. They shared a lot with me about farms. They're in New York, so it's not quite the same area, but a lot about spring houses and smoke houses and hay wagons and just all that kind of stuff, 22 rifles and just all that stuff, daily stuff of farm life. And the other thing I learned a lot from was the National Folklife Center in the Library of Congress have loads of oral histories that were collected all over America in the early 1930s, as you may know. And this wonderful archivist sent me a map, and she said, you just tell me which towns you want to hear recordings from. And I pointed out a bunch of towns, and she made a zip file with me full of all this oral history material. People in the early 30s talking about their life in these areas of northern New England which would have been in the late 19th, early 20th century when they were children, So that was amazing. If you're ever, looking for that kind of stuff, the Library of Congress, American Folklife Center, I'm sure, absolutely positive, they would have lots of information about the Welsh language press in America. Because of course there was quite a lively Welsh language press in America at one time. And I'm sure they have material. So they were great. They were so helpful. I mean,
I
assuming
also
they still exist and still have funding, but yeah.
I also found your connection with the French Canadians so interesting because, they'd come down to find work.
Yeah.
And they'd use the waterways to do it.
Yeah.
It's
And
fascinating.
got treated really horribly. My mom was a French teacher, French and Latin my mom taught, and she's still with us, but she's been retired for many years. And she had a very good friend called Norman Nadeau, who was a French Canadian New Englander.
Yes.
So we grew up knowing a lot about a lot about that history. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I lived in New Brunswick, so I knew all the history about the loyalists coming up, and then the expulsion of the French. So yeah,
Yeah. It's really, it's a big part of our history that, you know, doesn't get a lot of time in the history
right,
books, but it's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah,
isn't it? Yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
Meredith, one more question. What's your next book?
Well, okay. So, I'm a big restorer of old houses. I bought, well, I've done two and then the chapel. I bought a big Victorian terrace in Plymouth, and one time I was pulling up some floorboards and I found this advertisement, newspapers, old pieces of newspaper some electricians had left under the floor in what turned out to be 1923. And it said, and there was a little advertisement, it said, surgical rubber goods and implements, together with 76-page manual of wisdom, write to the manageress at LeBrasser Company, blah, 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 Birmingham. And I thought, well, and I put it on Twitter, which is at that time, I had a Twitter account and it was Twitter. Neither of those things are true anymore, but I put it on Twitter and I said, hashtag Twitter historians, is this what I think it is? And a friend of mine sent me something and said, oh, this tagged another person who's a historian, Carol Jones, she's at Kent. Yeah, this is definitely what you think it is. This is, first of all, surgical rubber goods was a euphemism for condoms, but also this company produced cannula and douching stuff for home abortions, basically. And so that started me on this whole journey of learning the history of British women and their experiences with pills and unregistered abortion in Britain, and how, you know, how many women died like that, how many women didn't die like that, what a common practice it was, all these medicines and things that were advertised everywhere, but in these sort of coded advertisements. So I decided to write a book about this particular company in Birmingham and three cousins who kind of inherit the wealth from this company, so that they become slightly posh people who've gone to, you know, Oxbridge colleges and stuff, but they can't really talk about where their money comes from. And then that whole history of kind of birth control and abortion in Britain in the early 20th century. So that's a novel called Rock, Paper, Sister. The two of the characters are twins, and there's a lot about their relationship. So it's called Rock, Paper, Sister, and that's the next novel. Yeah.
Oh, how long do you think it will take for you to complete it?
It'll be a little while before it sees the light of day. It'll be a couple of years probably before it sees the light of day. I've got a Royal Literary Fund fellowship, which will take me from 2026 to 2028. So that'll give me some time to write. So yeah, I took early retirement from Cardiff University and applied for this Royal Literary Fund fellowship, and I got it. So that's nice. Yay. Phew, basically. Yeah. So in that time frame somewhere. But thank you for asking. Yeah. And then I really want to write a novel about Carolyn Herschel, the astronomer. Yeah. So that's behind Rock, Paper, Sister.
Meredith, what subject did you teach at Cardiff University?
Well, I trained as an English literature person, but more and more as creative writing degrees grew and I was publishing fiction, I kind of got shoved over into creative writing, which I don't like teaching as much as I like teaching English literature. I'm not a big fan, quite frankly, of creative writing programs, really, especially not the way they're run in the UK. So that was one of the reasons why it was easier for me to take early retirement. We're having a bit of crisis in universities here, again, because of funding and stuff. And a lot of universities laid off a lot of people in the past sort of year. And so they were making a decent offer for me to retire early. So I did that.
And it sounds all too familiar here in the
Yeah.
US.
There you are. Yeah.
Next chapter in your life.
it worked. Sorry?
Next chapter in your life, Meredith.
Next chapter in life,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, yeah, and you know, there's a lot to do in the chapel. I need to form a community interest company. I need to apply for some grants to get a new roof on it. I can't get a new roof. It's a registered building. It's on the historic register. So I have to restore rather than replace, you know, but I've got to get the roof done. And the inside painted and dealt with, and new ceiling, things like that. So, and then we want to have events in there. I don't know if you know about plug-in singing, but
Yeah.
I live in one of the areas of Wales. I live in actually the area where plug-in survived the best and the strongest. So we have lots of plug-in carol services at Christmas. So we've got these great singing groups around here that sing plug-in. So, you know, I'd love to do that in the chapel at Christmas, and things like that. So, yeah, hopefully, I'll do that this year and then work on the novels as well. That's the plan anyway. Yeah.
This has been a very encouraging and exciting experience for me to hear all of what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Lori.
Does anybody have any other questions? So you, Meredith, you will contact Susan, yes?
I certainly will. Yes. Yeah,
Oh.
that's really exciting about
Really
the
is.
exhibit and about Susan being here. So I'll
Yeah.
definitely do that. Yeah. Yeah. And just thank you so much for having me. And you know, thanks for listening and
Thank you.
talking and sharing and your questions and everything as well.
Thank
Well,
you.
it
Diolch
was
yn
very,
fawr.
diolch yn fawr. It was
Diolch
very,
fawr I chi gyd.
it was very
Hwyl
joyful
fawr.
and interesting. Thank you.
Pob luck efo'r Gymraeg.
Da bo chi.
Diolch.
Okay.
Thank you.
Diolch.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.